Hello my ghouls, and welcome back to my channel. So today, our little ghost hunt across Southern Saskatchewan is going to take us to another location here in Regina. So unlike the last location, which was the Regina Cemetery, this location is a much more lively place, no pun intended. The Campbell, Wilson and Strathdy building was originally built in 1914, and it was built in an area that used to be residential but had been wiped out by the tragedy of the Regina cyclone in 1912. We talked a little bit about the F4 tornado that went through Regina in 1912 in the last video, and this is one of the areas that was heavily impacted. In 1991, the once wholesale grocer building became a new local favorite gathering place, with award-winning craft beer and pub food. This location also frequently has live music, whether it's jazz, folk night, or even some Irish music, along with Irish dancers on St. Patrick's Day. Now, this lively music and delicious food and great beer brings people from all over to come to this location. Not to mention, it still has somebody that likes to watch over the place. Welcome, my ghouls, to Bushwacker Brewpub. Now, before we jump into ghost stories and weird experiences that the staff have dealt with since they started working for Bushwacker Brewpub, let's kind of go back into the history about the location first, so that we can kind of understand why it could be haunted and who might be haunting it. So make sure you stick around until the end, when I will reveal who they think is haunting this location. So let's first go back to 1911. This area wasn't a warehouse district as it is known now. It was actually a residential area. There was the one warehouse building, the Ackerman building, which actually survived the Regina tornado, although it was badly damaged. It is still in this location, but otherwise it had been surrounded by mostly residential homes. And in the location of the Strathdy building was actually, at the time, a laundry service. So in 1911, it was the Deckley Laundry Service. And interestingly enough, I found this news article from August in 1911, which was then the morning leader in Regina. And they had mentioned that the 2204 Dudney location was actually a place that you can get opium. So it was like an opium den, apparently, on top of being a laundry service, or maybe in between being laundry services. I'm not sure. That part I couldn't figure out. However, in 1912, before the tornado passed through the city, it was actually belonging to Mac Lung Laundry. Now, I was able to find this out by looking up old city directories, as well as there was an article on July 4th in the newspaper that stated that the Mac Lung residents were still missing from 2204 Dudney, so they hadn't been able to state whether they were okay, injured, or what had happened to them. In the end, though, they never were added to the list of deaths for the Regina cyclone, so I'm assuming that means they ended up being okay in the end, which is good. So I don't think they would be haunting the location, but maybe they came back because they enjoyed their time there in 1912. I don't know. So after tragedy hit and the tornado ripped through the area, the site actually changed to become more of a warehouse district, as it is now. And one of the first warehouses that was built in the area was going to be the Cadillac of warehouses back in the day. And this was for the Campbell, Wilson and Strathdy wholesale grocery. They had hired on architect J. Russell from Winnipeg to design the building, and it was going to be made of red and brown brick with Tyndall stone foundation and detailing. Okay, now let's fast forward to the present day. So in the bottom two floors of the building, on kind of one half of it, at least on the one floor, is now Bushwacker Brewpub. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Bushwacker Brewpub moved into the location in 1991, and they quickly became a local favorite gathering spot. They have award-winning craft beer. They have a brewery down in the basement. And they also serve delicious pub food, as well as host things like folk night, blues and jazz night. They have an Irish night with Irish dancers on St. Patrick's Day. Lots of different things like that. They even support local artists by having a local artist wall where they promote work from local artists in the area. Now, little did they know that when they moved in, they wouldn't be alone and someone would be watching over them to make sure that they were taking proper care of the building and that the staff weren't slacking off. So back near 1991, Grant, the bar and marketing manager, actually had started working there. So he's been there almost the entirety that the brew pub has been open. And over the years, he has actually been collecting some of these weird, unexplained stories that the staff have been experiencing in the building. And he's been sharing them on tours. So while we were there touring, he actually shared a lot of fun stories. Now, I'll let Grant tell the stories, as I have some clips of him that I'll show where he's explaining all the different experiences that have happened in the building. But first, I'll share one that was my favorite, because I don't think we actually got it on video clip, unfortunately. And it had to do with before, like early on in the brew pub's time in the location. So this one actually happened to someone outside of the brew pub. But Grant had been working at the bar, so he was able to get this story. And it happened to Dave, an antique dealer that worked in the 3rd floor. He had an antique store up there. And at the end of the day, he was locking up. Now, at the time, I guess there was a big wrought iron gate that he had to like pull closed and lock at the end of the day. And he was just locking that gate when he realized that he had forgotten a light on inside of the store. And apparently the light had 3 different brightness settings. And it was sitting on the lowest setting at the time, and it was dimly lighting a portion of the store. Now, of course, he didn't want to have to unlock everything, go through the store, and turn it off. So he just jokingly said, "Hey, Jim, do you mind turning that light off for me?" And after he said that, the light turned brighter, and then turned brighter again, and then after a few seconds turned off. And apparently, he quickly rushed down to the bar to order a drink and told Grant this whole story. Because at the time, he hadn't fully believed that this ghost was actually, in the building. There's also reports of a man in 1930s wear wandering the hallways at times, sometimes just out of the corner of your eye, so when you turn to look, there's nobody there. So lots of interesting little stories that have spanned the entire history of Bushwacker Brewpub being in the location. Now I'll let Grant tell the story of the next one. Now this is down in the grain room in the basement of Bushwacker Brewpub. And I will say before I roll the clip that I actually had full body chills happen to me while we were in this room. And it was the only time that this happened for the entire time I was in Bushwacker Brewpub for this tour. And it happened right when he started explaining what had happened to one of the staff members in that room. And I don't know, it just felt like suddenly someone was standing right behind me and they were disapproving of what we were talking about. So it just gave me chills all throughout my body when he explained it. Okay.
But anyway, so when they're grinding up the malted barley to make beer, that they're using this machine over here. Right. So they measure out the different grains and they put it in the top, and there's 2 stone wheels that just lightly crush it, and then it comes out the bottom. But it's a really dusty process. Right. So we have to make sure that the doors are closed, and the brewers are wearing respirators and goggles, and super dusty. Even that heater in there, it's designed to be explosion proof. Yeah. Because with grain dust, any kind of spark,
definitely.
Boom. Right? So the doors are closed. But what had happened was, head brewer Mitch was just working right here. So basically, when the grinder grinds up the grain, it just comes out the bottom. It's kind of an archaic system, actually. But what we do is we're just filling up these Rubbermaid containers with grain, right? And when one is full, we pull it out, and we'll put it outside on a pallet jack, and then we take it upstairs. Right. But It sounds like it's a lot of work, and it is. There's a lot of labor, but once you've got this full, you've got to wait for it to all grind before you fill it. So basically, one guy is just kind of toting it, and the other one is loading it.
Right.
So Michael was standing right where you are, because remember, he said that's where this cross in the pipe is.
Oh, okay.
So he's standing right here, and he's just kind of watching Mitch work, you know, being lazy. And so all of a sudden, somebody pushes Michael right between the shoulder blades so hard that it almost knocks him off his feet.
Oh, really?
And Mitch, our head brewer at the time, he was kind of a gruff, grumbly old bear. You know, he didn't believe in anything.
Yeah.
Smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. You know, that kind of a guy.
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at Michael and, you know, what the F is wrong with you? You know? And Michael is, you know, he's kind of studying himself, and he turns around, and of course the door is closed because we can't have that open, or otherwise the grain dust gets all over the place.
Yeah.
So he doesn't know what's going on. So he goes down the hallway here into the bathroom, and he pulls up his T-shirt, and there's this red handprint right between his shoulder blades.
So now the next clip is actually in a small area in the basement again that used to be used for prepping food earlier in the day before things got busy. But of course, COVID pandemic caused things to slow down quite a bit, so they haven't been using the area as much. But at the time, stuff was still happening.
So one of the guys told me that he was working right here. I think they were just, you know, cutting up vegetables and processing stuff. And there was another guy here working away, and they had a big roll of saran wrap between them. And they're both working away, you know, the tunes are going and they're carrying on. And the big roll of saran wrap just went, just flew off.
Really?
And they're working away, and they kind of stopped and looked at it. And they just kept on working. Because I guess they had seen this kind of thing before. So they knew it's just, you know, James or whoever doing their thing. And you know, they just keep on.
All right. I found that one interesting, that the staff was kind of used to things happening around them and not being overly scared about it and continuing on their jobs anyway. So then we moved into what is known as the Bushwacker Clubroom. So the clubroom is actually an area at the bottom of the stairs in Bushwacker's basement, and you can actually rent it out if you're interested. It was more popular pre-COVID, but they're hoping as times change that it will become more popular again. So here's the clip from the Bushwacker Clubhouse in the basement.
But what had happened is, so our closing supervisor, she had just finished working in the office, writing a report, all that kind of stuff. And she was getting ready to leave, and she was by herself, and she came around this corner and was going to head upstairs, and she noticed that, well, these doors were closed, but all the hangers were swinging away, you know, and there's really not an opportunity for a lot of airflow down here, you know, especially with the doors being closed. There's another situation where one of the guys in the kitchen, I think he was taking something upstairs and he spilled it. So he went and got a mop and the bucket, and he left it sitting right here, and then he had to go upstairs to get something else, and then he was going to come down and do the actual mopping. And he said when he came down that the mop had moved, and there was a big circle, a perfectly round circle of water, like somebody had taken the mop out and just sort of walked with it and made the circle of water. But that's all they did, right? So he couldn't, well, I think he did the mopping, but a little bit freaked out.
All right, so the next clip I'm going to show you, it is in actually the brewery. So the brewery is quite loud, as you'll hear when I run the clip. So it's really hard to hear things going on outside of the brewery. And if you were far apart from each other in the brewery, it'd probably be hard to really hear each other unless you're yelling, right? So what is interesting about the space is I'll let Grant say the one story that happened in this location, but another story that is a little bit creepy, but doesn't really have any specifics to it, is that they frequently hear voices in this area. It's like someone is always trying to call out to them or tell them something, but because it's so loud, it's always muffled and they can't understand the words. And they even can't recognize the voice, or they go out and they ask like who was calling us, and no one was calling them at all, but they hear voices. So that it was kind of a creepy part of this location. But that one more thing happened in this spot that was interesting, and kind of to prepare you for this story. The Bushwacker Brewpub, so actually the whole warehouse building, was actually built beside the railway tracks. So there's railway tracks across the street, but they say that there's also a railway track that went behind the building to make it easier for them to load and unload the groceries for the wholesale. So that is kind of some preemptive information before we get into this clip. Here you go.
This is a beer right here. Oh, right, yeah. So they're all, individually labeled and that sort of thing. So, but what we used to do is we would stack them all on this as well. And what Mitch had said is one day he was in here working on a tank, and all of a sudden, all of the bottles started to shake as if there was a train going right by on the other side of the wall. Yeah. But nothing else was shaking. It was just the bottles all by themselves. And he said they were just going.
Okay, so our last stop was actually in the boiler room. Now, the interesting part about the boiler room is it still has, I believe, the original door, because it is a red door and it makes a creepy sound like this.
Let's see if I can make this creepy too.
Oh my god. And then it also has the original boiler. Of course, the original boiler is now decommissioned, but they never wanted to remove it because it would be a lot of work, because it takes up a lot of space and it would be quite hard to get it out. So you can still see the original boiler in there even though it's not hooked up. But what's interesting is the experiences that happened in this room happened from the coal pile. So because the boiler at the time was coal fired, they had to have a giant coal pile in the room. So what they had done is they put a chute into the basement from outside that they could just throw coal down the chute whenever they needed it. And they have a wall there now. I don't know if they did originally, but there is a wall there now, but it is open so that you can actually still see into where the old coal pile was. So that kind of is where this next story comes into play.
So as you can see, within this room, there's only one way in or out.
Yeah.
So this is the boiler for the brewery,
Right.
because that's how we get the steam to make the beer.
Right.
And boilers are finicky by nature. So Brent was down here one day just dealing with the boiler while he was making a batch of beer, and while he's bent over here, all of a sudden stuff starts flying from up there.
Oh,
just going over his head and smashing against the wall.
Yeah. So overall, what do we think about the ghost that is walking the halls of Bushwacker Brewpub? One of the biggest things that I noticed about the different stories was that it seems that he is rather shy. He doesn't seem to want to interact with newcomers. Grant did say that they have had a couple paranormal investigators into the building, and they find it hard to get a lot of good evidence, even though there's a lot of these stories indicating that there is something or multiple somethings there. So he did say that newcomers to the area don't get much. And as expected, I didn't get much either, other than the full body chills in the grain room. However, he does tend to show himself to people that have worked there, or he does mischievous little things to make sure that the staff knows that he is watching over the place. So who do we think it might be? The one person that we feel that it must be is the old general manager of the building. So he was the original manager of the building, and his name was James Strathy, or sometimes they call him Jim. Now, James Strathy passed away under unexplained circumstances in the 1930s. I'll get into that in a future video because I found lots of information about James Strathy, so I'm going to make him his own video to really highlight the ghost of bushwhackers. But one thing we can say for sure, especially given that the ghost when seen is wearing 1930s clothing, is that he's obviously still very attached to the building, still enjoys his job and role as being the manager of the building, and wants to make sure that all the staff is aware that he's watching over them and making sure that the place is clean and taken care of and that no one is slacking off. Now, if you're actually interested in paranormal investigations, then you should go over to Purgatory Adventures on YouTube. They actually did a full investigation of the location shortly after I had briefly visited there, and they did try to reach out to some of the ghosts to get names or information from them. And they did get a little bit of evidence, so you should make sure you look them up. Now, on the other hand, if you're interested in quality craft beer and delicious pub food, then you should definitely go check out the Bushwacker Brewpub. I will put their link down below to their website so that you can check them out. I highly recommend the cheesecake because it is delicious every time that I get it. They are also well known for their giant plate of nachos. Until next time, my ghouls.